60 Minutes, Rewind.
4 years ago this month, a Democrat they called Jimmy Who went into his party's precinct caucuses in Iowa and, well, you know the rest of that story. In 8 days, a Republican they called George Who will go into his party's Iowa caucuses hoping to repeat Jimmy Carter's success story. This Republican's biggest problem, besides a lack of recognition, is that some people say he's just too nice to be president. But although it would take a minor miracle for anyone to take the nomination away from Ronald Reagan at this point, it's been said that if anyone can do it, he can. Who is he? He is George Bush.
55 years old, Phi Beta Kappa from Yale, Navy combat pilot in World War II, a Connecticut Yankee who moved to Texas and made a fortune in the oil business, former congressman from Houston, former ambassador to the United Nations, chairman of the Republican Party during Watergate, former envoy to China, former director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Let me read you something that John Connolly's been saying about you. In reference to those jobs you held, many of them appointed jobs, he points out.
Clean it up now when you say it.
Connolly's quoted as saying, quote, cleaning it up.
Yeah.
George Bush sat on his butt in those jobs. He had those jobs, but he didn't do very much in those jobs.
I will adhere, albeit difficult, to the 11th commandment. Speak ill of no Republican.
But one of the major questions on George Bush is he tough enough to be president?
But is tough being nasty? Or is tough being a leader that people respect? Is toughness shouting and being ugly and trying to stick a knife in somebody? Or is it principle and leadership where you look over your shoulder and people are following? Let somebody else go out. It's not toughness. Toughness, go out there and say something ugly about somebody? I don't think that.
Well, a Christian Science Monitor, I know you saw this story, ran a story about George Bush, not an uncomplimentary piece, but the headline on it was, too nice to be president.
Niceness, sure. Decency, what's wrong with that? Toughness, fiber, strength, perception of the strengths of this country, I've got it. I understand it. But I just am not a person who feels you have to be ugly.
A lot of Republicans that I talk to say, why not go for John Connolly? He has broader experience than George Bush.
He doesn't. Never built a business. Never. I mean, let's lay down the criteria. Broader in what sense?
Well, he was a governor of the state of Texas.
Okay, and I was a congressman from the
cabinet
state of
member.
Texas. So was I.
Foreign affairs.
National security, no.
Makes a better speech.
Yeah, we looking for an orator? William Jennings Bryan didn't make it.
Do you fear Connolly?
Fear him? No.
Hello. I feel like writing...
Bush started campaigning early. He's been at it almost 2 years. Yet he's still the least known of all the leading contenders.
What a day.
Still struggling to be recognized.
Nice to see you. Hi, again. Oh, come on, let's go in.
How can anyone with such impressive credentials who served his country for so long have achieved such widespread anonymity?
By not playing to the cameras in the last days of the Nixon presidency, by not taking a cheap shot, by saying, look, he should be treated fairly, and then saying the party should not be dragged into the ugliness, by not going when I was at CIA and calling you up and telling you of all the fantastic changes I made, by making I know you did, and I'd been better known, but I made changes. I did it quietly. I reported openly to Congress, and then I elevated the morale of the CIA by making them understand that I knew that an intelligence service cannot be effective if you're not going to protect sources and methods of intelligence. So I haven't played for the crowd. I haven't been up against the left field fence, jumping up there and catching that, extravagant one. But I hadn't needed that. That's not what I've been trying to do.
But what you do
I'm
need
trying
is...
to do a job and do it well, and I've done it.
What you do need is a base. Where is your constituency? Who out there is willing to die for George Bush? To use a Texas phrase, there are people who say George Bush is a nice fellow, but he's all hat and no cattle, which is to say he has no base.
Well, let me tell you this. You ever seen Joe Morgan at his best? He's got class, and I got plenty of class. And I mean it in the sense of accomplishment. Doesn't matter whether I'm known now. What matters is, in this constituency, can I get those people in Iowa excited? Can I get them to feel this man can represent us? I want a national constituency. This old base theory is baloney. Absolute, total baloney.
One accusation that has plagued the Bush campaign from the very beginning, that he's merely a stalking horse for Gerald Ford. Bush's own campaign chairman, Jim Baker, who ran the Ford election campaign 4 years ago, said if Bush falters, quote, "We could pull it together for Ford in 2 weeks."
I don't know whether he said it in front. If he did, he made the wrong mistake, as Yogi Berra would say. But nevertheless, it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. Yes, they were asking him in April about having a lot of Ford people, and that probably was a very factual statement. But that was in April. I was an asterisk on these polls then, but things have changed. And you think I'd drag my carcass around this country being a stalking horse for Ford or anybody else? You're crazy. Absolutely nuts, and anybody that thinks that is nuts. I'm working too hard. I believe too strongly.
Let's be specific and be candid with me. What's your strategy for winning?
My strategy, keep my head down, don't have to have the big entourage, go to those small towns in Iowa, go to those small towns in Puerto Rico, actually, and in New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. We were there one rainy night when a film crew was setting up inside a hangar at the Lebanon, New Hampshire airport to film a George Bush commercial. The crew was under the direction of Bob Goodman, a media consultant George Bush calls his Cecil B. DeMille.
Watch the wires,
Bush
guys.
supporters were brought in to be in the film,
Watch the wires and be very careful.
their role carefully explained by Goodman.
When George gets off the plane, we're going to have a kind of a victory aisle for him to walk through. We're all naturally going to be rather excited about his entrance. And then George will come to the mics, we'll all gather around him, and we'll let him turn us on.
For this night, the airport hangar was transformed into a movie set. But the star's arrival, he was flying in from another campaign stop, was delayed by rain. Finally, here he was. Lights, camera, action.
I bring you word from across America. We're going all the way.
Goodman was delighted. The show went well. Everyone was happy. Well, almost everyone.
I was sitting in the rally.
I talked to some
Originally,
of these people.
we were supposed to fly here.
I talked to some of these people, and they knew full well that he wasn't flying in.
But he was supposed to have flown in.
Yeah, but they knew that he didn't fly in.
I didn't know that.
And they were happily going along with this game of having the thing filmed as though he had come in on a plane, and they were perfectly well playing along with it.
Reporters discovered that Bush had in fact arrived at the airport by car. It was raining too hard to fly. Had then climbed into a plane only for the short taxi run to the hangar. After all, the script called for an airport arrival, and that was what Goodman was going to get. Goodman and Bush are convinced that a strong media blitz can help narrow the gap between dark horse Bush and frontrunner Reagan.
There's something out there on that Reagan thing. I can't prove it to you. He's strong in the polls. I will say nothing to tear him down, but there's some erosion. It's almost, I think it could be the Teddy Kennedy syndrome. Way out 3-1 before you join battle, and then whip, down you go. Now, for some events that he has no control over, but also because the myth is gone. You're in there with your sleeves rolled up. And I think it's going to erode that Reagan strength.
The story will continue after this.
What about that commercial that Bob Goodman filmed up in New Hampshire? Well, it begins with a shot of the plane that George Bush did not fly in. Otherwise, it happened as advertised.
Opportunity of the 1980s. What has won out is very simple. Great personal energy, experience, and knowledge at the highest level. Quality. Ladies and gentlemen, this is George Bush.
Thank you. I bring you word from across America. We're going all the way.
George Bush, a president we won't have to train.
Your slogan is, George Bush, a president we won't have to train. But isn't that at least a bit deceptive? You were a congressman for 2 terms,
Right.
envoy to China for a year, at the CIA for a year.
Yeah.
You've never been elected to national office. What you did was win 2 elections in Houston, Texas.
Right.
Now you say we won't have to train you?
Yeah. Of course I got things to learn, but, lay it down there compared to Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter went in there, let's face it, he captured the imagination of the people. Trust me, I'm from outside. almost sanctified this thing.
And now, he's the best trained man to be president because he's had these 4 years.
Yeah, but he's wrong on many of the issues. You got to have training, and you got to have experience, but you got to be coming from someplace.
George?
In an effort to dispel the notion that his candidate may be too nice to be president, Bob Goodman now is portraying George Bush as
the American Eagle. We call him the American Eagle. And George is starting to feel like the eagle.
Cecil B. DeMille, I believe. How are you? Eagle is flying.
Mr. Bush, why do you want to be president?
I believe an individual can make a difference. I believe we can elevate the standard for people in our country by sensible economics. I know we can continue to project our conviction about freedom for countries around the world. And added to these convictions is I've been blessed by a breadth of experience that others haven't had. And it's service, I hope in an honorable sense. Yes, there's some adrenaline flowing in there, smell of grease paint, roar of the crowd,